Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GAPABA event hosted by the Public Service Committee. Voting is our superpower. I'm Sarah Hamilton. I'm joined by Rodney Atrio-Prasad, the co-chairs of the Public Service Committee. And to kick us off today, we've got an exciting video, Mission Impossible and Superhero intro clip. Bonnie, cue the video.
Thank you for that, Bonnie. GAPABA has grown to over 600 members and counts among its ranks general counsels of major corporations, elected officials, judges and public servants, partners at top-ranked firms, attorneys who lead their own practices, and of course the two superheroes you just saw.
As an overview of today's event, we have some fabulous speakers. We're going to talk about voting. And we do have the chat feature going on. We are recording live on Facebook, so everyone please do feel free to chime in, ask questions live. We want this to be interactive, and at the very end we will have some Q&A. So everyone please feel free to use the chat feature.
So our first panelist today is Nguyen. She is the litigation director for the Asian American Advancing Justice Atlanta. She grew up in the South. As a Vietnamese American with refugee parents. And Phi was one of those attorneys who went from sort of non-voting rights practice, she was a litigator, to voting rights. And I think she was inspired to do so by an experience she had with her mom, who tried to vote for the first time in 2016 after having been in the country for 40 years. So Phi, why don't you tell us about that, how that story of your mom trying to vote in 2016, what she encountered and how that inspired you to go into voting rights.
That's okay. This is my mom and I when we have our unhappy refugee picture, and then a more recent picture that's happier. But I actually started doing voting, get out the vote work in 2016 in advance of the presidential election, when I found out that Asian Americans have historically had the lowest voter turnout of all racial groups. And so that led me to want to register more Asian voters. And I specifically focused on the Vietnamese American community since I'm Vietnamese American. And through that process, then I learned that my own mom was actually not registered to vote. And she came to the US as a refugee in 1979. And she was 27 when she came here. She became a mother shortly after resettling in America. So she didn't go back to school or work outside of the home, but just did the full-time job of raising my sisters and me. And having fled an authoritarian regime, she actually does not like politics, and she sees it as a dirty word. So when I decided to help register her to vote in 2016, I had to first convince her that it was important for her to vote. So that was kind of the first barrier in the process. And so I had to do that too in my second grade Vietnamese. I had just learned how to say vote that year in Vietnamese, even though I grew up speaking it. But after that process, then I did help her request an absentee ballot because she didn't want to go to the polls. Again, she's been in the country for a long time, but she is a limited English proficient speaker, having not worked outside of the home in the US. And so I said, no worries, Mom, you can actually just vote from home and mail in your ballot. And the problem there was she actually ended up losing her ballot. So then she was like, well, I lost my ballot. And I said, well, don't worry. You can go with Dad to the polls on election day, and he can help you navigate that process. But what ended up happening when she went was, because she had requested her absentee ballot but lost it, then they told her she wouldn't be able to vote unless she went to the County Board of Elections to cancel her absentee ballot first. And this was also while I was still practicing as a medical malpractice defense lawyer. So I was actually in the middle of taking an expert witness deposition that day, and she's just texting me, and I'm checking my phone during breaks because for some reason there was a deposition scheduled on election day. But anyway, so she basically says, like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go to the County Board of Elections, which is kind of far away, and then go back to my precinct and try to vote. And so then there was like a second process of trying to convince her to go back. And, you know, she was embarrassed, and she didn't have any intention of trying again. She felt as though she had done something wrong. And part of what I had to do was convince her that she hadn't done anything wrong, that this happens all the time, and that they're not going to think that she's trying to commit some sort of fraudulent activity here. Anyway, so I actually reached out to Advancing Justice Atlanta, because by this time I had already started to do some work with them. And my good friend Raymond was the civic engagement coordinator at the time. And I said, Raymond, can you help my mom with this? And he really went the extra mile. He called her precinct, talked to them, and was able to basically tell them she should be able to cancel her absentee ballot at her precinct and then vote a regular ballot there without having to go to the County Board of Elections. Told all of that to my mom, and he also lined up a Vietnamese interpreter who could be on the phone with her when she went back to the polls if she needed to communicate and had any issues. And so after all was said and done, she finally went back and she was able to vote for the first time. And that was her first experience voting. But I will say, before she went back in the second time, you know, she texted me from the car in the parking lot, where I was still trying to convince her to go from her car to the polls. She said, okay, I'm going to go in, but if they don't let me vote, I'm going to kill you, which my mom has never threatened to kill me before. But that was how nerve-wracking the whole situation was for her. But she went in and she voted for the first time. So in the end, it was a success.
Right. And so that got you to the Advancing Justice. And then while you were there, you started working on a Wake Up Atlanta program. And we have a video here that a clip about your organization, Wake Up Atlanta, that we want to share. So let's see that clip.
Welcome back to Season 2 of Wake Up Atlanta. We're your co-hosts, Fee and Katie.
If it's your first time joining us, we are a web series dedicated to civically engaging, aka waking up sleepy Asian Americans in Atlanta and beyond.
Hello and welcome to Wake Up Atlanta. We are your co-hosts KV and Fee. We created this web series because Asian Americans suck.
Whoa, KV. I think the point that KV is trying to make here is that Asian Americans typically have very low voter turnout due to a number of structural and cultural barriers.
But also we suck.
Welcome back to Wake Up Atlanta Quarantine Edition.
Breaking news for you. Costco has bread flour and H Mart has yeast. You're welcome.
And more importantly, it's also AAPI Heritage Month. Don't you understand that silence does not protect anyone?
I know that you don't want me to rock the boat.
But didn't you flee Vietnam in a boat so that I could have a voice?
Our second speaker today is Sean Young. Wave, Sean Young. Sean Young is a 2006 graduate of Yale Law School. After graduating, he clerked the District Court of Southern District of New York. He clerked at the 7th Circuit and joined Skadden Arps. And then after that, he found his way to maybe a couple other places, but he's currently at the ACLU, where he is the legal director. And he has been involved in a lot of litigation cases at the ACLU. Everything from cases involving reproductive rights, criminal justice, civil rights, civil liberties. He has been involved in some of the first in the nation litigation cases, challenging various policies and procedures of police departments and others. He, in Georgia, was involved in litigation that helped prevent 160,000 voters from being removed from the voter rolls. So we're very excited to have Sean here today. Let's roll a clip of Sean in action.
Okay, I was not expecting that, but they did ask us to prepare a 2-minute, so I have it with me. It's not because I expected to. Hi, my name is Sean Young, and I'm the legal director of the ACLU of Georgia. So last year, several high school students went to the state Capitol building to see democracy in action, but they were prevented by the Capitol Police from entering the legislative gallery because they happened to be wearing t-shirts and buttons with messages on them. But that's a blatant violation of the First Amendment, which protects freedom of expression, including the right to wear expressive clothing. And so that's why we sent a letter to House and Senate leadership and the Capitol Police, asking and warning them that they have to allow members of the public to wear expressive clothing in the legislative gallery, so long as they're not engaging in disruptive behavior. The freedom of expression is the cornerstone of our democracy, and that's what this case is about.
And here's a picture of Sean and his grandmother walking Sean down the aisle. Like our other speaker, I think Sean has a personal story about voting and citizenship. Sean, can you tell me about this photo?
Yeah, so I got married almost to the dot a year ago, and my grandmother, who's 90 years old, walked me down the aisle, which was very special, and I'm very lucky that this happened before the pandemic. So what happened with her citizenship, she's been here for several decades and she wanted to become a US citizen, which is very exciting to us. But to be a US citizen, you have to be able to answer certain questions about our country. And her English is very limited. And so the way we quizzed her and tried to get her to know the answers was by translating every answer to every possible question by using Chinese words so she could sound out the words by memorizing the Chinese characters. And so that wasn't easy for her to do. She had to know the answers to 40 different questions, but because we had written out the answers in Chinese, she could just sound out the phonemes and she passed and became a citizen.
That's amazing. That's incredible. So with that being said, we're going to turn this over to our speakers who are going to share with us a lot of information about making your own voting plan in Georgia, some updates on early voting in Georgia, and don't forget to please put questions in the Q&A, and we will join you at the end, so please take it over.
All right, go ahead, Fee.
We're going to start first by talking about early voting. Although this is a lovely picture of me and Sean when Sean was actually my lawyer. Sean represented us in 2018 in one of the 20 or so lawsuits that was filed during the 2018 general election. So we got a good victory there. We're going to start first by talking about early in-person voting, which is actually ongoing right now. It just started yesterday, and Bonnie made this beautiful slide for us before early voting started, and so one of the things we've been telling people to do is to vote early to avoid the lines, and that message has not aged well, as we've seen yesterday. I have a lot of friends in California, and anytime they message me about Georgia, it's always something that they saw about our voting process in the news. So I, of course, got a text message from a friend of mine I haven't heard from in a very long time yesterday. He was like, 8 hours to vote, and so it's like clockwork. But even though we saw long lines yesterday at the polls and those long lines continued today, I've been told, then we are still telling people to vote early in person if you are able to. Every county has early voting locations, which you can actually find on your My Voter page, which I will type in here. It's My Voter page. It's mvp.sos.ga.gov. And that is kind of your one-stop shop for a lot of different information, including things like tracking your absentee ballot. If you decide to vote by absentee, it tells you your early voting locations and hours. It also tells you your precinct for election day, which is going to be different from where you can go vote early. So yeah, it looks like this. There's a lot of different things that you can do with it. I like to even pull it up for folks if I'm doing poll monitoring. If people are waiting in line, then one thing that you can do for them is to make sure they're in the right place, because they're not always in the right place. So then you can send them on their merry way if they're in the wrong place. Very handy tool for everybody to remember. So one of the reasons why we're telling people that you should still make a plan to vote early is basically, even if you encounter a long line or there's an issue at the polls, you're just giving yourself a lot more time to try again if at first you don't succeed, as the song goes. So for example, like with the story I told my mom, she did end up going back and voting, but there are voters who encounter something on election day and either they're unable to go because they have to go to work, or they just can't make it that day, or maybe they run out of time. But if you go now and you encounter an issue, then you have still a few more weeks to try again and come up with an alternative plan. The other thing about early voting is you have a lot more options in terms of where you can go vote. On election day, if you're going to go vote in person, you can only go to your precinct. Versus right now, you have your option of going to any early voting location within your county. And Sean just shared with me today that Gwinnett County and Cobb County have actually started posting the wait times for different early voting locations on their website. And so you can actually check that out before you go vote. And then obviously you can choose the one that has the shortest line, or maybe you decide to go another day to see if the waiting situation gets better. The other thing I think about early voting is, and my sisters and I used to do this, back before the pandemic hit, is you can go with your friends if you live in the same county. If you go on election day, then you have to go to your precinct. But if you go during early voting, you can actually get a big group of people together, or because it's a pandemic, maybe you don't get that big of a group of people together. But the point is, if you're going to be waiting, it's going to be better to wait with a friend. Or if you want to have like a more social experience or more fun experience, you can do that if you do it during early voting, where you can all go to the same location. Also, if you are in Fulton County, I have heard wonderful things from everybody who's voted at the State Farm Arena, that it's a really great experience. I think they have their own special sticker, for example, and I've heard that it's seamless, it's fast, and that there's generally just hasn't been a line there. So if you are in Fulton County, I would definitely encourage you to use that as an option. I am in DeKalb County, sadly, so I can't do that. So I guess sort of the bottom line for in-person voting is, you can go now. There's early voting on the weekend if you can't make it during the week. And so we just encourage you to go now and, keep trying and stay in line. Keep trying if you're turned away for some reason. There are so many people, including Sean and me, and so many other voting rights groups who are running hotlines where you can call if you encounter an issue. And our hotline, Advancing Justices. I'll put it in the chat, but it's 404-955-7322. And we like to share this in particular because we run it in multiple languages. So if there is somebody in your network who, or if you yourself are an LEP voter, then we're able to provide help in language. So
what does LEP mean?
Oh, limited English proficient. But yeah, so bottom line, go early, be careful, of course, and stay in line. I don't know if you have more to add to that, Sean.
No, I think that's great. We're also urging people to vote early in person this week. Obviously, the lines aren't ideal. I've heard some reports today that they're short or getting shorter. And the way I like to think of it is this. Probably a lot of the people on this webinar have the means and the privilege to be able to take a little bit more time to wait in line. Think of it as doing a service to those who don't have as much time, because the more people vote this week, the easier the process gets for people in the coming weeks. So that's one way you might think about it, but you know, yes, the long lines aren't ideal, but we nonetheless urge people, please vote this week. And I can now segue to absentee voting. So what is absentee voting? Absentee voting is simply a way to cast a ballot without going to the polls in person and waiting in lines. Obviously, absentee voting is available for everyone. And a lot of people are doing it this year, obviously, because of the COVID pandemic. What I like to tell people is that if you are still willing and able to safely vote in person, we still encourage people to vote in person. Because if you cast an absentee ballot and there's an issue with it, they have to tell you about the issue, which then adds more time, whereas early voting issues can be resolved a lot faster. If you are voting absentee, the one takeaway I want to leave with everyone is to vote immediately. Please vote this week. Election day is not November 3rd. Election day was yesterday, and we're in it now. With absentee voting, if you have already applied for one and you've received the ballot already, please commit to voting this week. If you have not yet applied for an absentee ballot and you absolutely cannot vote in person, please apply for a ballot today and do it online. There's a portal now where you can apply for an absentee ballot from the Secretary of State's website. If you apply today, you, in the worst case scenario, may not get your ballot for even up to 8 days. That's not acceptable, but that is the current state of affairs. So I don't want to manage your expectations. And then once you get that ballot, cast it right away. So, and the other thing I'll add is that a lot of people request absentee ballot in September. You should have gotten your ballot by now, and or should be getting it this week. If you are no longer comfortable waiting and you really want to vote in person, just be prepared that there may be an extra minute or two at the polls because they have to clear your, right now you're listed as having requested absentee ballot, they have to clear that. If you have received your ballot, but you decide to vote in person, please bring that ballot with you to the polls. It will make the process for clearing you for voting much faster. So now let's get into how do you cast your absentee ballot? Well, most people imagine, maybe we should go to this slide. Yes. We encourage people to use the absentee ballot drop box. It's easy, it's sanitary, and there's no postage required. I know the envelope says you have to use postage, but if you put it in a drop box, you don't have to. Why are we urging everyone to do that? Because Will Robinson, danger. No, Will Robinson, danger. Because if you have a choice between the two, if you put it in the mail, it can take some time for them to receive it. And under Georgia law, the ballot must be received by November 3rd, not postmarked, but received. So if you're putting in the mail, that adds an uncertain length of time to when the ballot is received. So we urge people to put it in a drop box. And drop boxes, their locations should be available on your county Board of Elections websites. But if you must vote by mail and put in the mail, put it in this week. Like, we are not playing games. Like, we gotta get these votes in this week. I think the more people vote this week, the stronger I think we're gonna have faith in the democratic process.
Danger, Will Robinson! Danger! No, Will Robinson! Danger!
So that's absentee voting.
I just want to add one thing to that we saw at the polls last time. If you do request an absentee ballot and you send it in and you're worried that it didn't make it there, then you can still go to the polls and request that your absentee ballot be canceled. Now, if you go to the polls and they check for you and they say, we've received it, you've already voted, then obviously you don't vote again and you can't cancel it. But if they look and they say, we have not received your ballot, then you can cancel it in writing at the polls and cast your ballot that way if you want to be extra safe that your vote is counted and gets there in time. I think there was a lot of confusion around that with poll workers and with voters. And so, I mean, obviously, if there are questions about it, then we encourage you to call a hotline number to help navigate that situation. But you should be able to cancel your absentee ballot at the polls, even if you don't have your absentee ballot in hand, as long as the county has not received your voted ballot already.
And that's another reason to vote early in person. That takes a few minutes to resolve. So let's get that kind of process resolved before Election Day. What we saw in June was that, and this is through no fault of the voters, elections officials were not getting out absentee ballots in time. So a lot of voters reasonably said, well, I have to vote in person. But then they had to spend a lot of time clearing their statuses, which then created long lines on Election Day. Let's take Election Day off the table, practically speaking, and get it resolved in advance. So I think now is probably a good segue to language access. Fee?
Sure. There is a question that I noticed, Sean, about whether you can use a different mailing service, or you have to, like FedEx or UPS, or if you have to use the U.S. Postal Service.
You can use a different mailing service, whatever gets the ballot up to them.
All right. Language access at the polls. So in Georgia, the only county that runs their elections in any language other than English is Gwinnett County. And the only language that they run their elections in Gwinnett County besides English is Spanish. So in terms of language resources in Georgia, I would say that we are kind of behind in what we provide for voters who are limited English proficient. But because of that, I think it's very important for people to know what their rights are in terms of what assistance they are entitled to at the polls. And so the law allows you to bring, if you are a limited English proficient voter, you are entitled to bring an interpreter of your choice to the polls with you, and they are allowed to go with you into the ballot box and help you with that process. There are a couple of restrictions on who can be your interpreter, but it's generally very expansive. The only limitations are it can't be your employer, a representative of your union, which we're not that unionized, so that's probably not a big deal in Georgia either. And it also cannot be a candidate who's on the ballot, or I think a family member of that candidate, unless you're related to the candidate. So very few exceptions that aren't going to actually apply to most people. And the other thing that you are entitled to is if there is a stranger or like a voter in line at the polls who is bilingual and they can help you, that person's perfectly entitled to go in with you and help you as well. Or, you know, I serve as a poll monitor on election day. And so if I notice that there's a Vietnamese voter who needs help, I'm well within my right to help that voter as well. So definitely know your rights there, and know that the law is actually very expansive about who can serve as an interpreter for limited English proficient speakers. The other thing that I want to encourage you to use as a resource if you need it is the hotline that I provided earlier, which was Advancing Justice's voter hotline, because we do have the ability to, I don't think that's the actual hotline I want you to share, Bonnie. It's the 404 number that I dropped in the chat. I think it's 404-955-7322. The other one that you were pulling up is a national hotline, which is also a good resource. But if you're in Georgia, then it's local people who are behind the hotline, and we are familiar with Georgia law, and we have the ability to provide assistance in language, multiple Asian languages. So really encourage you to use that as a resource if you need it. And I'll just say again, and I'm not trying to be down on the poll workers, but the poll workers have a great responsibility in trying to keep straight all of these different regulations and laws, and they don't always get it right because we're all humans. And honestly, a lot of times when people ask me questions, I won't necessarily know the answer to it either. So I will have to look it up, or I will call Sean, but we will get you the answer. And we just want to make sure that people are not unintentionally disenfranchised because somebody gets the law wrong at the polls, which unfortunately I've seen happen a lot of times through no malintent, but just misinformation, because there's a lot of different things to keep track of, and we're all humans. So any questions about that, please give us a call.
That's actually a good segue to the next section on provisional ballots. I'm going to try to keep this short because it can be a confusing area of the law. So as you see in the slide, provisional ballots are meant to be in case of emergency. If for some reason you're not allowed to cast a regular ballot, you can cast a provisional ballot. If you look at the screen, there are different ways names that are given to this. When you hear the words, paper ballot, provisional ballot, emergency ballot, all of those things are referring to the same piece of paper that you just saw in that slide. Provisional ballots are given in person at the polls if for some reason the system is not letting you vote. One common one is if your name doesn't show up on the registration list, but you insist that you have registered, they will ask you to vote a provisional ballot, which will only be counted if you somehow prove that you actually were registered. But there are many other scenarios in which they may be issued, such as a voting machine is down. The county election officials, through a regulation, have the discretion to declare an emergency and start having voters vote those provisional ballots. The polling place line closing time may be extended by a court. Then they have to start using emergency ballots or provisional ballots, whatever you want to call them. Whether they are counted or not depends on the reason for why they are used. I'm only going to focus on one kind that often comes up because a lot of poll workers unfortunately don't understand this rule that well. If you are voting on election day, which will apply to no one on this webinar nor any of your friends, so this is purely hypothetical because no one's going to wait until election day. If you're voting on election day and you go to the wrong polling place, they will say, you're at the wrong place, here is your right one. A lot of poll workers will just send you away, okay? But you have the right to cast a provisional ballot at that polling place. If you say, look, I don't have time to go to the right one, they will count your ballot on every race except to the extent that a race's geography is dependent on what precinct you live in. It will be counted for president and senate. So make sure you know that. And the general rule I like to tell people, unless the machine says you have cast an absentee ballot that has been accepted, generally speaking, don't let yourself be sent away from the polls without casting a provisional ballot. There's almost always a reason to cast one, and it's better than leaving the polls without casting it at all. So and they may also issue them during the early voting period, which is another reason to vote early, because if you cast a provisional ballot on election day, which no one on this call will, because no one's going to vote on election day, the general rules, you have 3 days to resolve the situation. But if you cast a provisional ballot for some reason in the early voting period, you have weeks to resolve the situation. So that's another reason why we urge people to, I think people are starting to hear a consistent theme about what we want people to do. So that wraps up that section. And I guess we can close, but then open it up for questions. Does that sound good? All right. Or actually, yeah, let's do open Q&A now, and then we'll do a brief close.
Hey, Sean, we had a question about what are the requirements for social distancing and mask wearing at polling places, because we've seen long lines and large crowds.
Yeah.
Are there local ordinances in Fulton or Gwinnett or the local counties that people should be aware of?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of any ordinances that would that mandates or penalizes people who don't comply with social distancing or other proper behavior. I don't know if I'm answering this question, but polling places and poll workers are being trained to enforce social distancing and mask wearing. I don't think they are going to hand out masks at the polls. And nor do I even think they can strictly prohibit any voter from entering without a mask, but obviously wear a mask. You should know that they have styluses in the cards that you use to vote at the polling place. Those are disinfected every single time. So that will be protected. And then in terms of social distancing, everyone probably knows, no one can enforce that perfectly. You got to use a lot of common sense, your trust in your neighbors, but that's the best we can do.
And I'll pass it off to Sarah shortly, but just in terms of that question we had with FedEx and UPS, even if voters wanted to use alternative means of mailing in their ballots, they should nevertheless do it as soon as possible, right?
Yes, please do it. I'm just going to straight up say this week. Do it this week. Just so you know, like our groups, at least ACLU-Georgia, we've done our messaging so that basically it's do or die in terms of vote by mail now. So let's not play games with the deadline. If you don't have a ballot, you're applying for it today. And then when you get it in 5 or 8 days, you're going to vote it by drop box. So that's how it's going.
And one more question, Sarah, and then I'll pass it on to you. So we've seen long lines at certain precincts, certain polling places in Fulton, in Gwinnett, in Cobb. I have a friend who said they waited over 2 hours. If you're a voter in, let's say, DeKalb, where I am, do you have to go to the polling station that's closest to your house or to where you live? Or can you go to any polling places for early voting that is in DeKalb County?
Fee?
You can go to any early voting location in DeKalb County. You don't have to stick to the one that's closest to your house. So if you hear that there's one that's further away in DeKalb County that has a shorter line or that has been reported to have a better voting experience, you can go there during early voting, which is another reason to go during early voting.
What if the early voting place is not in your county? Just to clarify again for the listeners.
You should definitely not go to an early voting location that's not in your county. And same clarification with respect to drop boxes. You have to drop, if you are voting absentee and using a drop box, it has to be a drop box in your county.
So very important, absentee voting and early voting must be in your county. And how can people check, I guess, this might be a silly question, but if people might have moved or whatnot, where could they check what county they're registered in? Or their voter registration and their precinct, if they need that information.
That will be on my voter page, the link that Fee shared around, the MVP link. That website is your best friend for all voting related. Yep.
If anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, we will just ask some of the questions we did get privately and that we had beforehand. Some of them might be repeat from the program today, but just to make it very clear for people. What if, let's say, you show up for early voting or regular voting and you're not, and you forget that, and you're in the wrong county, or if you're in the wrong polling place, what should people do?
You should definitely try to get to the right place. So you would, I guess, check your My Voter page to see where the correct precinct is. And if you can, then you should, like if you have enough time, then you should definitely try to go to the right precinct. If you don't have enough time to get to your correct precinct, but you're in the right county, you can vote by provisional ballot. But as Sean said earlier, that should absolutely be your last resort, because you want to avoid the situation of your ballot not counting for some reason. So best thing would be to try to get to the right place. And if you are in the wrong county, you definitely need to get to the right place. Do not try to vote provisionally in the wrong county. Even if a poll worker tells you that you can, they should not be telling you that you can. But some poll workers got that wrong in 2018. And the result of that was that a lot of people cast a provisional ballot that was not counted because they were in the wrong county. So if you're in the wrong county, get to the right one. If you're in the wrong precinct but in the right county, still try to get to the right precinct. But if you absolutely can't, then you can vote provisionally if you're in the right county.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, legally, the way it's set up is that elections are run at the county level and then they report up to the Secretary of State. So that's why we keep emphasizing the county lines are of paramount importance. So.
Okay, a couple more questions. Does my vote really matter in Georgia?
Your vote always matters, always, in every single election. It's our civic duty to participate in our democracy.
And there's some talk this year about Georgia being a swing state. Is that just fluff and smoke, or is there some truth to that?
That's not something I can comment on.
Sure. But your vote always matters. That's right, whether it's a state or not.
Whatever color state someone wants to call it, your vote always matters. Politicians pay attention. The reason why there's so much interest in voting rules and procedures is because votes matter. If they didn't, no one would be writing articles about this stuff.
Great.
And can I just add one thing to that too, is there's obviously the presidential election, but there are a lot of other races on your ballot, and a lot of local races are won by very slim margins of victory. So if we're just talking about math, which I'm not great at math, but if we're just talking about math, then you can look at some local races and really see the impact of your vote mattering. So I will just add that too.
Great. Another question we have is, what if it's only an hour before I can get to the polls? I'm sorry, what if it's an hour before the polls close that I can only get to the polls? What's your advice and your insight on that?
You must physically be there. If you physically arrive before the polls close, you will get to vote. So but once the polls close at 7, what they're supposed to do is a poll worker then ends the line, and everyone still in line can vote, but anyone who joins the line after 7 o'clock does not get to vote.
And that applies to early voting as well as election day?
Yes.
Okay. Judge Wong asked a couple of questions with respect to the drop boxes. He wants to know, how are those votes collected? And if you use the drop box, how can you track your ballot?
You want to take that one?
My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, but my understanding is that ballots from the Dropbox are collected every day.
Yep.
Is it every day after 7 o'clock, or is there a specific time?
I don't remember time, but it's collected every day.
It's collected every day, and then you can use the My Voter page to track your absentee ballot, and there's also a new feature from the Secretary of State where you can track your ballot, and I don't know if that is faster than My Voter page. Do you know, Sean?
I don't. I will tell folks in general, yes, there's a new ballot tracker that they're using for the first time. I haven't heard reports on whether it's good or not, but you should be told. If you have submitted your phone number and or email address with your voter registration form, they should also notify you there of your status. I will say that the counties have not traditionally been great at timely posting the status of your absentee ballot on the My Voter page. It's a problem that we're routinely dealing with. Sometimes they'll put in the wrong code. Sometimes they won't put the code in a timely manner. And it is very, very frustrating. Nonetheless, I would look at that. If you feel like the status has not been updated in a while and you're wondering what happened, definitely give them a call. But let me also, actually I should have done this earlier. The ACLU-Georgia is primarily tracking this issue, absentee ballot handling. And I'm going to share an email address that encourages people. All it is ballot@acluga.org. If you have any problems with absentee ballot rejections or not being processed, please let us know, because we're always working cooperatively with elections officials behind the scenes to make sure that gets done.
And I think there's a follow-up question with respect to the drop boxes. Who is allowed to drop your ballot in the drop box? Do you have to do it yourself, or can you have a family member or a roommate do it for you?
You can do it through a family member, but let me look it up. Let me get this exactly right. I'm going to pull the statute, and meanwhile, maybe you can address it.
I actually just looked at this question.
Okay, good.
We have a voter FAQ that we put out, and it actually answers this question, but you can have very specific family members. So you can actually, your roommate can do it. And hang on, let me pull it up. Your parent, including a parent-in-law, your grandparent, an aunt or an uncle, a sibling, a niece or a nephew, a grandchild, your spouse, or your child can drop off the absentee ballot for you. So basically, a close family member, which is all of those people that are specifically enumerated in a statute, or your roommate. And then if you are a voter with disabilities, you can have, and you have a caretaker, your caretaker can deliver that for you, even if they don't live with you.
Okay, I have a question about, this is just something I'm curious about. Fee, you spoke very touchingly about your mom and how intimidated she was by the entire voting process. And for a lot of immigrants, the entire endeavor can be very intimidating. We've also heard talk of national poll watchers at polling stations on election day. And so I'm wondering if that could also create another layer of intimidation. And so the question is, what is the extent of someone, a poll watcher, for example? What can they do? How can they communicate with voters? Can they ask, an API elderly voter who is voting for the first time, any questions? What is the scope of their permissible interaction with a voter, these poll watchers?
So it's a little bit complicated because we have what are called poll watchers, who are people who are actually defined under the statute, who are affiliated with either a political party or a candidate. And they, to my understanding, Mon, correct me if I'm wrong, are not supposed to talk to voters, at least while they're voting. And then you have poll monitors, which is what groups like Advancing Justice, we have volunteers who serve as poll monitors. I think groups like Fair Fight have people who serve as poll monitors. Sean, I don't know if ACLU has a poll monitor program or not, but they're essentially trained volunteers who are not defined in the statute, but who are able to engage in the type of conversation that you would be able to engage with with a voter at the polls. So there are certain restrictions around, for example, you can't campaign and like try to get a voter to vote a certain way while they're like in line to vote. Like that is off limits for everybody. People might do exit polling where you talk to a voter about what their experiences are after voting. You can do that, but there are certain, I think, physical limitations. Like you have to be like 150 feet away from the building, or you're supposed to be 25 feet away from voters in line. So there's restrictions around how close you can be to voters, what you can talk to them about. And I think one of the things that voters should know is if they feel like somebody's intimidating them or is doing something very partisan, then they can report that to one of the poll workers, and the poll workers should, address the situation, because any partisan activity really should be not taking place at the polling location.
That's a very important distinction between a poll monitor and a poll watcher. How can people tell who's who? Do poll monitors versus poll watchers have a certain designation? How will people know who's who?
I think one could always ask who a person is affiliated with. For Advancing Justice specifically, we have sashes that say poll monitor, and we're very upfront with what organization we are with, and we tell people that we're nonpartisan, and we train our volunteers to be nonpartisan on all fronts. Like even if somebody's like, who did you vote for, then we train people to say, don't talk about that, like that's not what you're here to do. I think poll watchers are also supposed to identify themselves. Sean, do you?
Yeah, they wear name tags, and they're typically, if not always, in the polling place itself. Yeah. Whereas the ones that were organized by organizations, they are not typically inside.
Yeah, I think poll watchers typically interact more with the actual poll workers, and they're inside and they're observing the process, but not really interacting with voters and troubleshooting. I don't think they're allowed to talk to voters.
No, because they're in a very sensitive area, and so the restrictions are really high for them. I actually see a question which I'm eager to answer, and then I'm going to say another thing to supplement what I said earlier, because I've been getting questions about that. I think I've seen multiple questions about what ID do you need to bring to the polls. That's a great question. My quick and easy one is to make sure you just Google Georgia voter ID requirement, and it'll show you the list of IDs. Let me address exactly. I want to emphasize a few things that might be counterintuitive. First, an expired driver's license works. I want to make that really, really clear. It should have also listed out-of-state driver's licenses also work. That's kind of a problem that doesn't list that. But here's the other thing I really want to emphasize, because this is a very common misconception. The address on your driver's license does not have to match the address on your voter registration. A lot of poll workers get this wrong. The whole point of voter ID is to verify your name with your photo. The address is not what they're supposed to be looking for. And this causes sometimes some issues at the polls. Voters will be told, oh, you can't use this. That's inaccurate. Please don't let them send you away because your address doesn't match, because a lot of people don't update them. You should update them on your driver's license. A lot of people don't. So please be aware of that. If you just think about it, you can use your passport to vote. Obviously, your passport doesn't have your address. I don't think it does. And so just keep that in mind. The other issue I wanted to really quickly, a lot of registered voters got these mails several weeks ago from places like the Voter Participation Center and the Center for Voter Information that sent absentee ballot applications with a lot of your information filled in. I got like 3 of those. And it came with letters like, we see you vote a lot, or we see you don't vote a lot. Do this. If some voters like filled them out because they thought they were in trouble and that they were supposed to, and I don't think they realized they were asking for an absentee ballot. I'm only mentioning this so that if you show up at the polls and they say, oh, you've asked for an absentee ballot, and you're like, I don't remember doing that, that might be the thing that happened. But don't be alarmed by it. There's not a big deal. Vote in person, you'll be fine.
Great. Well, do we have any more questions from our audience or any other comments from our panelists? If not, we have just a couple more questions that we'll ask. What do we do if voters in line experience intimidation? People have been waiting in lines for a lot of hours. You guys talked about how these monitors are allowed to be there who are separate from the poll watchers. What do people do if they feel intimidated? And is there going to be security, or is there any sense of how this is going to work out?
I would report any instances of voter intimidation to the poll worker. I would probably ask for the poll manager and report it to them. And if the issue does not get addressed, maybe I would do both. I might recommend reporting it to the poll manager and also calling one of these organizations like ours, like ACLU, like Fair Fight, like all of the different organizations who are investing so much of their time and resources into making sure that people have access to the ballot, because we want to know about that too. And I think it can be something that's taken care of at the precincts with the poll workers, but if it's not, then it's important to basically fly it up the chain of command, which would include, of course, the county board of elections.
Voter intimidation is a crime, so please take a photo of what you see too. That's going to be kind of critical. We're all lawyers. I think we all get that. That's pretty cool.
Great. And you can see these questions here. Sean, I think you mentioned the polls close at 7 o'clock, but under what conditions would people be able to vote after 7 o'clock? And then what times do they open as well? Maybe we should cover that again.
Oh, gosh, I should know that offhand. I'm not sure when they open because I'm not a morning person, but I should know that information.
7 a.m. to
7
p.m.
7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
On election day, but I think some of the early voting hours are different, but it's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on election day.
Right. Check your county's early voting times and hours. On election day, they could be extended if there was a big glitch that resulted in several hours delays, or this happened in the 2018 elections. Then a Superior Court judge will order the closing time to be extended. So that's that. But of course, it's totally irrelevant to everyone on this webinar because no one's going to vote on election day. Everyone's going to be voting this week, so that won't even be an issue. I can also talk about the election results. Under the law, the counties have 10 days about the second Friday after election day to finalize their count, and then they report, all the 159 counties report their results to the Secretary of State, who then certifies the result a week after that. Obviously, though, people start counting beforehand, which is why you read the news and all this kind of stuff. Georgia is good in some respects with respect to absentee ballots, because when you submit an absentee ballot, which everyone who's doing it will do this week, they are supposed to very promptly, within a few business days, look to see if there's any problems with it. Like if it's a signature issue or you didn't follow instructions, and then they're supposed to tell you if there's a problem with it within 3 or fewer days. We're trying to get it shorter and shorter. And then you have plenty of time to resolve it, which is why you need to get your ballot this week. After they do that check, then they have an option 1 week before election day to start opening the ballots to get them ready for and getting them scanned. And then on election day, they don't start tabulating them, like actually counting the votes until 7 p.m. So.
Is there a way that people can follow this process live, or how is this reported to the public, or is it all done behind the scenes and then just announced?
No, there is a way to do it, and one of our staff attorneys just did I literally just asked him to do a memo on public inspection, so now I'm frantically pulling it up to answer this question, but if you, maybe I'll kick it over to Fee while
I don't know the process off the top of my head, but I just remember that you can do it because I remember everybody was doing it in 2018. Everybody was going to monitor counting processes for provisional ballots for sure. Do you remember that, Sean?
I do. But anyways, we can move on to the next question while I look. Sure. I'm having them do. They're like doing memos.
I think it is a matter of like going to it's not like online or anything. You would, I think, go to the county board of elections where they're counting, and you can stand there and watch them count, I guess.
So the main takeaway is vote early, vote this week, vote by absentee ballot, vote in your county if you go by by early voting. I guess one question as well is, if people want to be involved in the process, obviously besides voting, what can members do to be involved on election day or in the voting process?
Great question. Go ahead, Fee. So I think that's yours.
I'm sorry. I was reading I think Bonnie's comment, and I'm not sure if we answered that question correctly. If you're asking about like election results being available, yes, you can get those online. Like the Secretary of State will broadcast that as they're counting, and then the AJC will, and probably other actually news outlets will do that too. I was interpreting the question as if somebody wanted to actually observe the process of
that's how it was
being counted, which I guess less people are interested in that. But
I don't think you wanted it. The answer is yes. Move on.
That was a very lawyerly response, but yeah, the results will be online at some point.
Or the AJC, which will publish it live, which is sometimes the best source. So thank you for clarifying that. And back to the question, how can people help out on election day? Voting early.
I'm so glad you asked, Sarah. You can sign up to be a poll monitor or interpreter with Advancing Justice Atlanta. Sean and the ACLU and other orgs have really done a fantastic job, I think, of helping counties recruit poll workers, because there was such a dearth of poll workers in the primaries, and that contributed to a lot of problems across the board. So I think some counties now have enough poll workers, but other counties don't. And so if you're in a county where there's not enough poll workers, then the role that I see poll monitors having is just supplementing that knowledge and being able to help troubleshoot issues that might arise. If you have enough poll workers and you have well-trained poll workers, then the job of a poll monitor becomes more obsolete. But unfortunately, the reality is we are still needed and we are still necessary. And we are definitely needed in some counties where we know they're still reporting not having enough poll workers. And so Advancing Justice, we do most of our poll monitoring in Gwinnett County. And so I would highly recommend, if you have some time to dedicate to doing poll monitoring, to sign up with us to be either a poll monitor or an interpreter. And if you're willing to work 2 shifts, then it is a paid opportunity as well. So that would be my main ask for people.
There's also, if you become a poll worker through our program, you can get CLE credit for it.
Oh.
So I should have led with that. But this is also This Just In. I'm going to share a link to everyone. Fulton County in particular actually is looking specifically for attorneys to serve as deputy registrars at the polls to help process voters who had requested an absentee ballot but are showing up to vote in person. To be able to process that quicker, we were able to get that change. And so that's also another site you can look at and read for yourself.
Right. And so all these links, and there's been some material kind of on the screen, which we'll also share. Now, separate from the Fulton County one, to be a volunteer or monitored, is there any requirement that you have to be an attorney, or is that open to everyone?
It's open to everything. Thea and I are talking about has been open to everyone except that one thing I just said.
The Fulton County one.
Right,
Okay.
the deputy registrar one, yeah.
Great. Well, we hope this was incredibly helpful. It's always amazing to have people who've been so involved in, I mean, voting laws. Who really reads all those regulations and knows all the history and the technicalities of it. So thank you so much, and we hope this was useful for our members, and just, you know, a reminder that, you know, voting is our superpower. It sounds cheesy, but it's true, right? And so we hope that everyone watching this today will make a plan to vote early, to exercise their right to vote, to get their friends and families to vote. This is a very important process. It's central to the democracy, and for lawyers, you know, is in particular, I think we have a special duty to participate in the civic process. So I would like to thank our speakers. Rodney, actually I'll do the acknowledgements really quickly, and then Rodney, the co-chair, will introduce some upcoming events. We would really like to thank Bonnie Yoon. Of course, nothing is possible ever with Bonnie Yoon. He made these incredible videos and the slideshows and getting all the materials together. Pratyusha Chenji, who's part of the GAPABA communications committee, who's behind the scenes working so hard. Of course, our speakers, Rodney, the co-chair, and Advancing Justice and ACLU, who are doing a lot of work for the public good, and of course GAPABA, who supports the lawyer events with various funding and the administration of the event. So with that being said, Rodney, would you like to introduce some upcoming events for GAPABA?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Sarah, for participating in this and for doing this very informative and hopefully very helpful discussion. GAPABA is really blessed to have Sean and Fee and resources at their disposal that Sean and Fee provides, and so it just speaks to the richness of GAPABA's membership. So if you are watching, please join GAPABA. It's a great organization. You get to hang out with Sean and Fee and Sarah, and you get to come to upcoming events like our October 28th mentorship program, and that's usually for young attorneys and law students. It's a great mentorship program from GAPABA because, you know, as we've discussed earlier, we have judges, we have, you know, general counsels, we have a really broad spectrum of professionals in GAPABA who provides mentorship and career guidance to young attorneys that are invaluable. We have an event coming up on October 28th, and of course, it's never too early to mark your calendar for our gala event, which would be September of 2021. Fingers crossed. But again, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Fee. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And as Sean will, I'm going to say it for him, vote today. You have a couple of hours. I think it closes at 7 o'clock, so you have an hour, 15 minutes. Make a plan. Vote today. Get in early. Vote early, not often, but early. And if you can do it safely, do it live. If not, utilize the absentee option, but as soon as possible. But the bottom line is that you should vote, and you should vote, and you should vote, and you should vote early. Again, thank you all for attending, and thank you to our panelists.